Experience, when defined by its composition, is as much about the moment as it is the context. We often associate media to the fragment of time it was originally experienced in, and that can severely affect our perception and judgment. Enjoying a terrible movie that you found by chance with a couple of friends, or being caught by some real-life problem during a playthrough of a new game are all situations one might closely relate with because of how we categorize memories, by association. That is why recommending a piece of media to, let's say, a friend, largely comes down to a pure game of chance, especially if you've been neglecting to put points into charisma. You might just have on your hands the perfect blend of features that, as far as you know, your friend is certain to enjoy, but because of unforeseen circumstances, the recommendation ultimately falls onto deaf ears. Take Yomeniki for example, which before I can even trace a particularly related pattern in my mind, I catch myself remembering the carefree moments of my past, where in a particular rough episode of insomnia, I stumbled into its recently translated existence and only broke free of its grasp when I realized that the sun had long returned, completely slipping past my attention. After what felt like a complete set of 24 hours, I wasn't sure if I made any sort of progress, if I was close to the ending, or if there was even an ending at all. A conclusion to all that I have experienced so far. Without realizing, I've been completely mesmerized by its surreal structure. Had I come across it through more sensible means, I would probably not go beyond a couple of doors and brush it off as a simple exploration game. Does that mean that the game was bad? No, just that it wouldn't connect at the right time by no fault of its own. Experiences. Not the game by themselves, but the experiences. Remember Phantasy Star Online, the early days of Final Fantasy XI, World of Warcraft, or even Guild Wars. As much as I hate the concept, I understand there are some things which can't be replicated and you really had to be there. Some are still out there, trying to chase the ungraspable, and while they can certainly keep playing them, they refuse to accept how there is no way to go back. It only seems appropriate that I found myself yet again in a similar self-state while delving through the ever-growing piles of digital content of my own fault and deciding to have a go at one of the latest in translation efforts, resulting in a somehow comforting sense of déjà vu throughout the night until I was jolted awake from the numbness by what I can only describe as an abrupt ending. Unfortunately, it was only after finishing the game that I came across the discourse behind the English translation, of how it was based on a previous Spanish translation and somewhere along the line a machine was used in the process. It's not like I didn't suspect of something, as even while heavily sleep-deprived, it was hard to ignore how the translation was just brute-forced into the game's text system, leading to a very interesting script, put through a very interesting format. By the time of recording, I can't possibly recommend this translation, but I would be lying if I said all of this didn't add to the already surreal nature of the game. This feeling permeates to its own existence, as besides the limited and exclusive release to Japan, Germs, the targeted city, has largely been forgotten and relegated to the odd mention together with other peculiar games in the system. Developed by a Japanese company unrelated to the medium, this was their first and last venture into video games, as they mostly kept themselves to their original field of CG animation. Honestly, it all manages to elude me, as it appears that they use their knowledge from game development into future projects. But the lack of information that comes from the language barrier doesn't allow me to completely confirm this. Despite rebranding themselves along the way, it seems that they are still active to this day, so honestly, good for them, or to whoever is still left from the development team. Released in 1999 for the PlayStation, Germs, the targeted city, classifies itself as a Earth invasion psychological adventure, but one can easily draw comparisons to the open-world nature of Missouri Falls, crossed with the unreal style of LSD Dream Emulator. By analyzing the past state of the world during the development and subsequent release of Germs, one can easily trace out its origins and inspirations. From the popularity of the novel The Body Snatchers and its subsequent influence on the genre with its contemporary themes, to the resurgence of science fiction back into mainstream, together with the rediscovery and appreciation of B-movies. As such, Germs has every detail deserving of its classification, from its story to the gameplay and its graphics. It's pure B-movie and it deserves to be loved as such. Although, while movies don't ask much more than the viewer's attention, games require much more extensive input, and being aware that not everyone has the patience to go through it, allow me to present my experience with Germs, the targeted city. Your first point of contact is with the game's first bold choice of making the logo barely readable, and it should be considered an hint to the overall quality of the design choices in the game. Pay no mind to the ominous geometric shape morphing behind it, as even by the powers of foresight, I have no idea what that thing is supposed to be, just that it is in par with the rest of the game. While in the void, they take the opportunity to give some more context to the situation, of how you, the nameless protagonist, left town for college, became a newspaper reporter, and now, 20 years later, you've been transferred to the branch office in the city. With only 2 people working in there, the first day of work drags until 5 AM, when you are finally given control, still at your desk in front of the computer. In what could be considered the only piece of tutorial in the entire game, you are left directly in front of the first interactable, and arguably one of the most important, so before you even turn your head, you should see what that is all about. Ignoring the menacing boot sequence, here you are presented with several important tools for the adventure. You have a special map highlighting some of the important buildings of the city, an email inbox where you'll receive hints on how to continue the story, and your overall stats, just in case you need to know how injured you are in each body part, or for how long you've been awake. You also have the options, which are actually just that, 2 options, one for text speed and the other for car speed. What did you think the turbo button was for in the old desktop PCs? It was for your car, of course. Tackling your first set of emails, and you got someone named Fujita claiming to be your high school friend and saying how he now lives in the suburbs and that he needs to speak to you about the nuclear power plant. The next one is a survey from Indanko, the city's first and last internet provider, which, considering the type of questions, led me to believe that they know what I've been targeting lately. The last one is from a forest ranger about something that fell down north of the city, and while he isn't saying that it is aliens, he really hopes it is aliens. With the computer business out of the way, you check what's more on your desk, with a notepad being used to save the game and the phone to mostly receive calls. Fujita asked to give him a call before meeting him, so you partake in the rare opportunity of being the one calling in first. Directly to your right is your only colleague, which the game doesn't even bother to name besides addressing him as your assistant. He is able to store your weapons in the office, and by using the telephone booths across the city, he can save your game or arrange for your car to meet up with you. Oh yeah, you can't drive in this game, and you'll quickly wish you couldn't. There are other transportation methods like the bus and the subway, but they all suffer from the same problem, which I will get to in a second. Before you get lost after leaving the office, you are directed by 2 massive arrows pointing to the 2 doors in front of you, which I incorrectly assumed at first that it would lead to the same place. On the right is the map shop, which is definitely weird, considering how you already start with one. The thing is that, when you buy a map of a location, what you get instead are the directions to that building, as the locations themselves don't have any sort of detailed interior map. For now, I buy the directions to Fujita's house, which of course they have, and take on the advice of talking to the man in the back of the shop. While not necessary to beat the game, he gives further info about locations that might help you if you ever get stuck. And more importantly, something you can easily miss considering the awful design for the options menu, is how you can scroll further down for more options. It took me 4 hours until I realized this, and in a game mainly built out of patience, I would gladly welcome this information sooner. With the directions put to paper, we're finally free to figure out how to get there. Opening the map shows your location with a compass that points to the direction you're faced, so it's not like you're completely clueless of what route to take to the objective. What you'll quickly figure out by walking with the map open is that you walk slow, or better yet, there is a lot of city to walk in, and your first objective is on the edge of the map. Analyzing your options will have you notice that the map is covered in bright green and orange points, which are labeled at the bottom as the bus and subway stops. But the problem is how the office, the starting point and the place you're forced to return to multiple times, is still several degrees away from the nearest stop of either, so the game is basically begging you to take the car, so you try to take it for a spin. And there are currently no words that can be cobbled together to explain how it feels to drive this thing. Imagine playing Deadly Premonition, okay? It's worse. Slight tangent about the overall control scheme, but the game got stuck between being completely 3D while having the sensitivities of a dungeon crawler. So the D-pad is used for camera control and the face buttons are used to go forward and back. No, you can change this. This was near the end of the console cycle, where the dual analog controller was already commonplace, and yet they have you turn the wheel with the shoulder buttons for some reason. It is pretty cool and immersive to being able to look around the inside of the car, but I got to the end of the game and, honest to God, when I started up the car, I would then turn my head instead of the wheel, like it was some sort of comedy routine to myself. But none of that comes close to the absolute worst part of it all, which is when you hit anything at all, the car just loses all speed, and that includes any and all curbs. Pair that up with the fact that turning is either a hard drift or not at all, the game really doesn't spare you the trouble. In a naive attempt to minimize grabbing, I decided to tackle the bus system next. There are 3 separate routes that all converge into the Grand Station, so in most trips you'll be going there to exchange routes. This only highlights the other problem of the game, one that certainly got more traction on that generation onward, which is the number of loading screens you must jump through to get anywhere. The subway is the most egregious one, to the point where I only used it exactly once and I was already done with it before I even got to the train. Finally, after a lot of struggle, I get to Fujita's house, who explains that he's been continuing his father's work, which apparently includes a machine that measures distortions in the space-time continuum, and is currently pointing to something going on at the nuclear power plant. He then gives you a gun, and tells you that he has something extra in the garage, which turns out to be some C4 that was left from a previous job he did. Now I know the game is supposed to be more of a psychological thriller, but the way the world is barely held together by having to stream the data constantly has honestly caught me more than I would like to admit. Accompanied by Fujita's, at least in spirit, you take the bus to the power plant, but the problem now is that there are 2 stops, and without knowing which one it wants me to go, I find myself having to walk around the block, trying to feel my way through this massive, desolate world of black and white, besides the ominous, giant floating arrows that vaguely point to random places. You see, sometimes the arrows are just there to indicate the entrance to a building, and other times they are pointing to the objective, but there is no discerning difference between the two, so what the game is saying is, fuck you, walk around and find out. Finally, I find the entrance, only to be stopped right away by a crash test dummy. I love how Fujita's entire plan was to simply walk through a metal detector with a gun and some C4. Though in retrospective, this was before 2001, so it might have worked for all I know. And before you wonder, when you hit the radius around an NPC that has something to tell you, and they will snap your neck towards them, whatever the situation is, like one of those internet chiropractors.
And relax.
The new plan is now to find another entrance, like finding the first one wasn't hard enough. And as expected, it takes me 10 minutes of walking to find another one. Despite saying how there is no one there, Fujita tells me to be careful, which to me is a clear sign to start going guns blazing. and lo and behold, your first enemy appears, the guard dog. If you are about to sigh out of relief for the walking and driving part to be over, you'll quickly wish you were miles away from these action parts. I never once in my life have complained about Morrowind's combat, and even then I feel like I must apologize to it after having to play through the entirety of this game. No matter the type of weapon you have, be it close or long range, as long as the enemy has an arrow above them, your attack is calculated to it depending on several factors like what type of enemy you are facing and your level of experience with the weapon, but the numbers seem to be oddly stacked against the player. It boils down to exploring the enemy's programming, because there are certain dead angles where they disengage from battle, so you can reload your next shot, step in to shoot, retreat and repeat. Luckily, 90% of the encounters can be solved like that. The problem are the remaining 10%, which turn into nothing more than mashing at this clusterfuck of a control scheme in hopes you win the damage race against the enemy. You also have psychic powers for some reason, but those only allow you to check the enemy's info post-mortem, and what I can only describe as a personalized short elegy. Certainly makes the killing easier when you can check their LinkedIn profile. After shooting away through half of the power plant, I encounter this cursed fella equipped with a shotgun who finally manages to get me. I swear that if something had snapped the camera somewhere during this moment, I would have shit my pants. Something with a fucked up head just killed me, and instead of a game over, I get transported to the alien headquarters, where they seem to be drying out their human body pillows. Despite the unusual chill environment, I explore around thinking for sure that I've hit some sort of soft lock, and that the game would have you come here multiple times to solve the mystery at large, but I was giving the game way too much credit. What I didn't know at the time is that when you are killed by someone infected by the aliens, you get revived as one of them and are forced to go all the way to the hospital where you can turn back to human. Completely ignorant, I reset the game to load the only save I had by this point, which was before even meeting Fujita, so it was back to doing all of that shit again. This time, with some fancy footwork, I was able to kill the shotgun freak, which gets me a key to somewhere. This is the part where I wonder if I missed the button to pull out a map of the area, but nope, none of that here. After enough exploring, I encounter a new creature, and with my life on the line I start shooting, planning on asking the questions later. Luckily the game threw me a bone here, and just had the creature stand there and eat lead until he had enough and passed out. It is then revealed that the creature has been guarding this machine, which appears to be sending energy into space, or at least that's what Fujita says, so you blow it up with C4, because things exploding in a nuclear power plant is what's the most sensible plan. Luckily, the place is laid out to give you a quick exit in the end, so it's not all that bad. Ah, right, if you don't eat and your stamina gets to 0, you die. Guess who was the idiot that learned about that too late and had to replay the entire section one more time? Yeah, for some reason you'll lose stamina when you take damage, but also if you haven't eaten. And it's not like it's hard to get food, as there are multiple different restaurants throughout the city, with some even providing takeout so you can prevent this exact scenario, but I found out about this in the worst way possible. After catching back up yet again, and making sure I don't die of hunger anymore, I then go back to Fujita's house, just to be informed that he will call later when he has further updates. As a man of his word, as soon as you enter the office, the phone rings, but it turns out to be an anonymous caller saying how he wants to help but doesn't want any innocent people getting hurt. Oh, okay. What am I supposed to do with that information? The emails are not much better, as Verizon is telling me they're going to eat me from the inside out, and someone from the power plant is thankful for our help, because blowing it up seemed to be in their planned schedule. The most important point here is that the city is closed off, the government is involved, and some agent from the Department of Defense is calling to arrange a meeting, so I make my way there as fast as I can. On the way there, I wonder what I did to deserve a map where you can only zoom in once and only in the center. If you want to check something on the edges of the city, pull out the included map that is packaged in with the game, or just, I don't know, squint harder at the screen. You might have noticed that some characters have faces while others don't. I would like to point out how that would be a good indicative to the importance of the characters in the story, but the two schmucks back at the map store have faces and they couldn't be less relevant, so I'll put it down to the developers running out of time and leaving it half-assed. Despite coming to meet the agent at the station, he asks to meet him at the hotel instead, as they really want you to walk around in this giant city they made. Now is a great time to explain how you can't run inside buildings, but side strafing is slightly faster, so if you wonder why I'm at an angle most of the times, that is why. Interesting enough, while on the outside you can still side strafe, but you can't run at the same time because they didn't want you to go that fast. Being forced to walk at this speed to explore the hotel was when the psychological part of the game started hitting hard. I have not talked about it until now, but the accompanying soundscape that haunts the players throughout the world is actually on tone with what you could expect for a game that looks like this. Just an absolute mess of a composition at every turn, with every piece being a 50-second loop that will, without a doubt, get to you, as together with the drowning sound of your own footsteps, will leave you begging for the silence that permeates outside. The hotel has to be the biggest offender of this, as you are forced to literally hear your marbles rattling inside your skull as you trudge through the fragments of hotel that manage to barely load in time, looking for whatever the game wants you to currently find, until you realize that you have to walk all the way back to get out and For those who might understand without context, know that I have played Flower, Sun and Rain without being aware of what it was and absolutely loved it, and I can't wait for someone to eventually translate the original PlayStation 2 version so I can play that too. The problem here was never the walking speed, it's everything else that it's coupled with it. I eventually found the agent, who tells me that there are 3 others and that he needs help finding them. What I wouldn't know until later is how that was just flavor text, and that the next section unlocks at a specific date, making me go around in circles just to waste my time and sanity looking for non-existent characters that only show much later. During my search, I trespassed on someone's room and they weren't too happy about it, so I engaged in some self-defense. Later, while roaming through the night, I heard the call of better weapons in the distance. So I got another gun in hopes that this would make combat easier. It didn't. Late into the night, I go back to the office in hopes of having new emails or someone calling to tell me where to go, but I end up getting sent to jail without an explanation, which might be related to the 2 people I killed in the hotel. Luckily, their bodies disappeared from the morgue, so while that somehow absolved me from the murder charges, I'm still sentenced to having to walk all the way back to the office. This time, a member of the city's congregation contacts you, as he suspects the church of hiding the disappearance of their own members, so after another long drive you get to the cathedral, where you basically have to talk to everyone to unlock the door to the bell tower, and on my way through it, I get caught once again when a priest pulls out a shotgun out of nowhere and starts having a blast. While gunning down the entire place, I notice how the color palette is awfully familiar to the original Alone in the Dark, which is further reinforced by the untextured and solid colored characters. All of this culminates in the next boss, which is a trio of morphed clothman. While initially caught off guard, I managed to find a way to completely cheese the fight by side-strafing so hard that not even the power of God could help them. One thing that happened throughout the entire game is for how each section just ends with the boss dying and nothing happening. I am not expecting some big fanfare, but it always seems like I missed some objective while I casually leave the area. But luckily, that was never the case. When I get back to the car, I realize that if you press start while stopped, you can set up the GPS that will decently guide you to your chosen destination. So once again, I ask myself, what is even the point of the map shop? But I never got an answer back. Without any other solid leads, I just explored some more, to which I finally go through the left door near the office and discover that it houses the one and only chiropractor in town, and while this one doesn't take you to Flavor Town, he can easily heal you and quickly pass the time, which are both useful. Curious by the ever-eluding edge of the map, I traveled north to where the forest ranger warned me about the crashing of some sort near the house of some old fella who, despite not being of a sane mind anymore, At least he has an excuse, as an actual spaceship is just parked outside of his backyard, but unfortunately you can't enter it. Eventually, I got a call from someone spotting nonsense, but at this point, it's the best I had, so I decide to pay him a visit. Because you are a friend of Fujita, this man gives you the Cloudbuster, something the government made that he converted into a weapon. And this appears to be a reference to the real-life work of Wilhelm Reich, who created the real Cloudbuster, a device which claimed to have the ability of producing rain by manipulating the argon energy present in the atmosphere. I didn't mention it at the time, but your ex-girlfriend Naomi contacts you, asks if you want to have dinner together. And like that wasn't bad enough, she wants to do it at the hotel, so you know what that means. After a brief description of the meal, she invites you to the lounge, but you can leave right after, thank God. A doctor also emails you to explain how people have coming down to the hospital with a strange illness that mutates the body. I go there, expecting it to be the next place of interest, but the most significant thing I do is almost shit my pants yet again. Finally, Fujita has some news he wants to share, so after a quick bus trip, he explains that he got a weapon from the previous power plant visit that he wants to try out. But I guess using it in your own backyard is a bad idea, so he wants to do it in the abandoned warehouses downtown. What sucks is that every time someone gives you a new weapon, they send it to the office instead of straight giving it to you, so you have to go back to grab it before hitting the warehouses. Luckily, the car's GPS points you in the right direction, so you can get there pretty quickly. But what is this? The empty warehouses are not empty at all, they are full of conspiracy. Damn you, Fujita, was this your plan? After getting an ID card, you now have to go around entering each individual warehouse to unlock all of the 5 locks while fighting several forklifts with your new magical wand. After one too many loading screens, you go deeper into the secret base, where you find one of the government agents you were asked to find. But turns out he's already infected, so he asks to be put out of his misery. This leads to the boss of the area, which is someone who fused into a machine, but who is pretty weak all things considered. Like previous times, you just leave without much fanfare and head back to the office, where you get a surprising email from your internet provider saying how they're opening the upper floors of their headquarters to the public, and seeing how there's not much more to do, I decide to visit the place, only for it to be revealed that there are actual aliens controlling the network, who openly explain that the ship that crashed just north of the city was carrying an infected being, which ruins the plans of the aliens that have already been on this planet for more than 4,000 years. And that is it. That's all they say. They appear to have a voyeur fetish for humans, and this whole infection thing is ruining the vibe, so they want help, like they aren't part of the bigger problem. Naomi eventually calls, asking to once again hang out at the hotel bar, like I hadn't enough of that place already. Just for me to being caught right in the alien's trap and having to fight my way through an area that was clearly not meant for this type of bullshit. After that, you are basically forced to go through the entirety of the hotel once again, taking care of every alien in sight, and that would be fine if it wasn't for the fucking music that eventually forced me to mute the damn thing until I got out of there. Besides killing everything oddly shaped, I find another government agent. The ex-girlfriend professes her interest in working at the hospital, and I get out. I have to say that despite the absolute chaos of their silhouette, the alien designs are pretty cool, and their retro sci-fi look reminds me of the aliens from No More Heroes 3, with their funky disco style. In that brief period of time, Naomi somehow started working at the hospital, but I love how she is more worried about not having a white coat and going into the most dangerous place in the city during a pandemic. Despite what it might seem, you're not supposed to go to the hospital just yet, but the coal mines. But the email that tells you this might come too late before you waste your time. At the same time, a society of psychics called the Temple of the Universe emails you about the underground labyrinth beneath the city, and because that sounds more interesting than coal, I decide to go there first. I love how their building just consists of a front desk, and right behind it is a fucking vortex. They also give you a crystal, another weapon that while it looks interesting, it's goddamn awful. Especially considering how you have to go back to the office to grab it, so off to the mines we go. The trip takes you to the farthest from the city, and while I should already be familiarized with the world by this point, the fatigue was finally getting to me, as the night felt especially oppressive, even in a world of muted tones. As I drove through the night and out of the city, the cliffs surrounding led me to what could possibly be the last place, as I knew from being transformed back then that the aliens' headquarters were located here. Right at the entrance to greet me is Mr. Government Agent, which is kinda awkward because I tried to kill him the last time. But never mind that, diplomacy has failed and this is America, I think. So it's time to shoot some aliens. This comes down to a fight against a literal dickhead with the biggest parachute pants ever known to man. But like all the previous times, you just leave afterwards and then return to the office. After another call, you rush to the hospital after Naomi asks for help, as they are being flooded by sick people. You know the situation is bad when the nurses are open carrying, so I whip out my gizmo and start blasting more aliens, even if some are already fused to their beds. You can also encounter another one of the agents, but this one has already morphed, so he asks to kill him too, before hinting about the existence of a last resort bomb that might wipe out the entire city. After fighting your way through, you face the vice president of the hospital, who morphed into a pretty sick form, with an even sicker dead animation. You get the morgue key and discover that it also connects to the ancient labyrinth, like the cathedral and the mine, revealing that they've been using that to smuggle people through the entire city as they plan to infect everyone. As you trudge on ahead and deeper into the labyrinth, Naomi goes with you into the coal mine, where a new path opens up there, revealing the last defending force of the aliens, protecting something called the catapult of consciousness. All of this culminates on a fight against what proclaims to be my other self, saying it needs me to become whole again and to vibrate in a catapult. I'm calling bullshit, cause this side-strafing game was pretty weak, so I easily destroy it and I guess the mine is now collapsing. Somehow my assistant managed to follow me into the mine, and after telling me to run, the game goes into an epilogue back in the void, explaining how the catapult collapsed and the door to the other dimension has closed, and that's it. You're back in the office. A new day had arrived, as I wondered about feeling like I've lost a plot thread somewhere along the way. As I would later confirm, that's just the way the game ends. They put you back like nothing has happened, with the epilogue part even alluding to this strange feeling. One is so used to be thrown into the title screen or to be put back in the beginning for a second lap that I didn't even know what to do, and finally clocked in for some well-deserved rest from this long nightmare. It's really bizarre how there aren't any credits for this game anywhere, not even in the options, so I can't look up if people who worked on this have worked on something else. Seeing how it was self-published, I guess this can be considered an indie game. As for some other things I didn't mention at the time, before going to the hospital to help Naomi, you can go back to the man who gave you the Cloudbuster and he'll give you a new weapon, some sort of camera that shoots balls. Possibly a predecessor to the camera obscura. I forgot to talk about it, but there is no concept of money in this game. You can buy all the food and guns you want without having to worry about going bankrupt. I guess the newspaper is footing the entire bill. Better skip town soon before they realize how many Big Macs I ordered in just 1 week. There is also a video in the disc that isn't used anywhere in the game, but it seems to be some sort of unrelated CC animation to maybe test out the video playback of the PlayStation, which is definitely interesting when you consider how there isn't a single video in the entire game. At least, I finally know that the cover is supposed to be the infected hospital director, even if a bit more elaborate in comparison to the in-game model. In retrospective, I guess this thing is supposed to be the catapult of consciousness. I'm not even sure how I should wrap this up. Maybe I should just